high-level opening panel discussion. And for this session, our topic will be maintaining a global and interoperable internet. And here, as we can see, we have two speakers already visited, who are Ms. Karla Skarda, the Senior Director, Registry APNIC, and also our CEO of TWNIC, Jofen Yu. And also for the speakers, we will also have Mr. Bertrand and Laura and May and Lim. And for this session, it will be moderated by Mr. Jia-Rong. So now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, can we please give them a big round of applause to start this panel discussion? And now, I will hand my control to our moderator, Mr. Lau, please.
Usually one of the most challenging things. And earlier I didn't get to say sorry for not being there in person. I've been there every single time. But this year, it's an open secret. My wife is expecting our third and last baby, but she has a risk of early premature birth. So my wife has essentially told me I better stay home just in case. And that's the reason why I'm not there. So I do apologize for not being able to be there this time. Well, now on to the topic, which is maintaining a global and interoperable internet. Now, we kind of all talked about this earlier in my welcome speech as well. Let me set the stage a little bit, then we'll go into a discussion. So I think Bertrand earlier in his keynote, he talked about governance of the internet versus governance on the internet. And it's quite important to talk about this. So Bertrand laid a very good groundwork there by talking about actually governance of the internet. It's quite well established. And in some ways, yes, it's true, because governance of internet mainly focuses on the unique identifiers, which are domain names, IP addresses, protocols. We mainly focus on these things. And there are established institutions or organizations that do these, which is ICANN, the regional internet registries, as well as the Internet Engineering Task Force. So there is an established mechanism or institution, in Bertrand's words, that puts these unique identifiers together. But this doesn't mean that in the governance of the internet, there is no risk of fragmentation. We continue to see different things pulling us apart, like legislation, regulation, geopolitics, global conflict. They are also stresses and could also be causes for fragmentation. Now, the other aspect also, which brings in our other panelists on this session today, would be on the governance on the internet, which currently we don't really have a clear global organization or institution that allows for these conversations to happen. And it could happen in various areas. So for today's conversation, we will cover both. And from this discussion, hopefully it gives everyone a sense of where some of the issues lie. Would we have any solutions out of this discussion? Maybe not, but it could give us some insight and direction into where we may be headed. So that's really how I'm going to start. Now, let me then start with the opening question. So we all tend to start with the premise that a global interoperable internet is good, right? Everyone tends to think that way, right? A global interoperable internet is good for us. But does anyone disagree? Now, maybe I can call upon my speakers first, and this might make for good debate. Maybe I can go to Mayan first. You have a more broad coverage in terms of your work. You work with a larger, wider group of different clients. The space that you're in is broader. Maybe from your perspective, can you share a bit about what do you think? Do you agree that the global internet is always good, or are there other perspectives?
Right, thank you very much. 大家好. My name is Mei Ann. I am the Director for Data Governance at Access Partnership, which is a global consulting firm. We focus on technology and risk assessments. On the global internet, Jia-Rong, I think that you know a lot of the work that I do has always started from that assumption that a global interoperable internet is good. But I want to qualify it. I do think that it's a good assumption to make, but I think we need to make sure we understand it is an assumption. I think that there are people and groups who have always carved out different parts of the internet for themselves for specific reasons. It could be going into the university, for example, which I think where a lot of us first encountered the internet, at least for those of us who are a little bit older. we went into the university and that we had an intranet, for example, and there are all sorts of technical reasons for wanting to run an intranet, for example, and also security reasons. I think that there are also reasons that people do want to ring fence certain types of zones, security, national security or otherwise type of security. You've got children. I think that, for example, if you want to do a protecting children internet, you could ring fence it tightly and ensure no interconnectivity and interaction with the outside internet was possible to limit the harmful influences or elements that have really plagued some of our children right now. I mean, it does get boring. I've spoken to some of the toy companies and they do think that that type of internet is boring. But again, starting from that premise that a global internet, a global interoperable internet is a good assumption, but let's not try to impose that as a matter of principle on people, different cultures, different nations, different societies. I think we can make those assumptions, but we really shouldn't be surprised to find that people are different from us and we cannot force the principles through. Jia-Rong?
Thanks, Mian. Thank you. That's very helpful. And I think it ties in with what does fragmentation actually mean for each of us? Could mean very different things. So in the governance of the internet space, which is ICANN and the unique identifier space, for us, fragmentation means that we no longer use the same set of unique identifiers. So that means that we use different IP addresses, we use different sets of domain names, and there could be 2 parallel or 3 parallel systems running at the same time. So that's really the definition for us. Whereas when it comes to governance on the internet, it's much harder to define what does fragmentation actually mean. Are we, technically speaking, we are still using the same internet instead of intranets because our system is still interoperable. But on the other hand, we do want to ring fence it, just like you mentioned, to prevent harm. And even for businesses, they also want to ring fence their applications to keep their users within their own networks. So that's also a form of fragmentation, or is it? And maybe using this broad question, perhaps I can jump to Bertrand first, because at the legislation or jurisdictional level, it's clearly already fragmented. So, any thoughts from your perspective? Is global interoperable internet necessarily good or otherwise? Bertrand, what do you think?
Thanks, Jia-Rong. I think one of the big challenges that we have always is when we say the internet, we're talking about a lot of very different things, because there is a technical dimension, which is the standards, the things that make the system work. But we have a tendency to use the word internet to mean our connected society. And that's a very different thing. Because, as you just said, on the one hand, the technical architecture is purposefully ageographic. It is intended to connect anything with anything that it wants to connect with, apart from any restrictions that people may legitimately want to put on who they share things with. But technically, the principle, the goal, the objective that everybody shares is to make things connectable, interoperable. And we've all bet on the network effect, no pun intended, that makes everybody having a benefit in connecting with the largest network. So whether there are alternate routes or not, they cannot establish themselves as easily as they could have 40 years ago, because today everybody is relying on this set of interoperable mechanisms. So on the one hand, we have something that is, and I've said that to a lot of people in the political environment, the architecture, the technical architecture is fundamentally global, geographic, and it is intended as a default. On the other side, as you just mentioned, the legal architecture is absolutely the opposite. It is organized, as I said in my keynote, around separate jurisdictions that are strongly defended. And one of the challenges that we have is that a part of the technical fragmentation that is being adopted through physical means or legal means is because people are frustrated, for good or bad reasons, with their inability to impose the physical territorial structure on a system that is global. And because we don't have agreement at the global level among states, states are using the only tool that they can have, which is national legislation. And so I don't think anybody really wants to do a fragmentation at the technical level. It is a result. Although increasingly, and that's what I'm mostly worried about, there is a criticism that is emerging at the technical level to say it's a matter of sovereignty to own this network. I mean, or our portion or national portion of the network. And this is part of the large debate. And there are some countries, I mean, when you look at what, in particular, Russia has done with the RUNET, it is this security-oriented notion in a context of geopolitical tension that is driving the desire to have a few checkpoints that control the bypass and the connectivity. So the system remains connected, but it becomes weaker on a technical basis because of the political reasons. So I think nobody wants to separate things. It's just that it is a consequence of the lack of agreement.
Thank you, Bertrand. Very helpful and very clear. Now, I think it's a good segue for one of the questions I wanted to ask, and we can help the audience understand what it might mean when we talk about fragmentation from a day-to-day perspective. So let's do a segue to that. You know, like when we talk about fragmentation, can we just go around, and Bertrand already talked about it at the national legislation level. What would it mean to our speaker, for you, if there was indeed fragmentation? So Bertrand already mentioned for his on the legislation regulation level. So let's go to the other speakers. Perhaps Karla, let's have you go first because it's still tied to technical. You know, for example, what if we had fragmentation at the IP address level? What does that mean? What would people see from a day-to-day perspective?
Thank you very much, and thank you for introducing the topic. And I really enjoyed the approach, Bertrand, that you spoke about earlier. Yes, we are relatively fortunate in that we are mostly focused on the technical aspects of at APNIC of making sure that the internet stays interoperable and that it stays open and unfragmented. And this has been a really strong focus. It's actually underscored in our mission statement, which I alluded to earlier, which is global, open, stable, and secure. That is exactly what we are trying to drive through, and that's been our mission for the last 30 years. Fragmentation would, as I also alluded to earlier when in the opening address, would actually be the the beginning of the end of the opportunity for the barriers to entry for people that are in societies that are not yet connected. That would mean that those barriers would be raised. And I just think that with the internet having become so ubiquitous and so much part of everything that we do, that would be a real tragedy for humanity. And also, as we start to think about how technology is evolving, it would be a tragedy for the entire ecosystem, as in the global Earth ecosystem that we live on, because it's informing so many activities that relate to how we're approaching the environment. So this is something that we are continually focusing on as at a very fundamental level. So because it is a very technical and a very physical level that we are focused on. But the protocols that kind of govern how we are actually communicating with each other have also evolved, and the policies have evolved over that 30-year period of our existence, to the point where there has been some approaches that have been a little different. Now, the motivation isn't at all nefarious in the same way that the motivation, I would suspect, for the control, the span of control, wanting to be increased at the governance level is not nefarious. It's generally because the outcome that we're seeking is to increase security. Amongst other things. But at a very fundamental level, some of the work that we've done over the years as different RIRs, securing the opportunity for people to interact with each other. So I'm talking about things like APAC-TWNIC and some of those programs that we've introduced over the years. Even those have evolved slightly differently. So what we've done is we've of late had a very strong focus on how we can start bringing those pieces of work together. And that's why the really important work that the NRO is doing right now about making sure that we are completely aligned in our approach to things like APAC-TWNIC is getting a strong focus from us right now. So it's absolutely fundamental to what we do and how we need to continue to approach the technical aspects of the internet.
Thank you, Karla. Let's move to Bertrand as well, like from besides IP addressing, numbering. So from a CCTLD domain name perspective, if there were fragmentation, how would that look like for your stakeholders and your customers?
Thank you, Jia-Rong. I think it is from the CCTLD perspective. I think, of course, we can see it's possible that different technology, like to have like a different set of IP address or domains. I mean, I think it's also, it's possible, and it will lead to the fragmentation, of course. So I think it's important for us to work together with like APNIC. To work hard. To maintain. Interoperable. Ability of the internet. So, but I think currently. Based on my observation, I think my understanding is that at the logical level, from the CTOD perspective, I think it's people, now have more, stronger consensus that the fragmentation, at the logical level, meaning that a different set of IP or domain names, I think is not really good, for the whole society or whole community. So for us, I think the technical, fragmentation, we don't see a lot of like a focus on that, but we do see just like what I mentioned, in the keynote speech, that we see from the CTOD, the fragmentation is that actually is more like the intervention, mainly from the legislation or the government, to disable, the access to the domains or use of stop of use of IP addresses. So I think is what we see, yeah, and I think it's also how to respond. How to manage well. It also depends on how we the policy. At a local CCTOD level. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move away from the technical bit, which sometimes I joke that only the geeks like us really enjoy. But let's talk about the application layer. So, we have with us today Laura Cao, who is the Manager for Government Affairs and Public Policy from Google. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. So the theme again is fragmentation. Now, the technical layer is one piece, but everything else everybody sees and touches are all on the application side. Now, from your perspective, Laura, can you share with us if there was fragmentation, and actually perhaps there already is, what would your users experience? How would they see, how would they experience in their daily use when there is fragmentation at the application layer?
Okay. Thanks, Jia-Rong, for having me here. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura from Google's Google Taiwan's Government Affairs and Public Policy team. Speaking about fragmentation, for Google, we of course want to provide our consumers with the same experiences of Google's products and services across different countries and markets. However, if there's going to be a digital fragmentation on, governance or policy or regulations, definitely people's access to contents, privacy protections, and users' freedom to transcend or communicate would increasingly vary depending on where they are located. And useful innovations will become less accessible and less effective under digital fragmentation. And new products will become harder to launch and scale on a fragmented internet, of course. So if we wanna, speaking about an example of how application layer of fragmentation looks like, one really important and important and big example is the messaging fragmentation. I'm not sure if people with iPhone and Android phones notice the difference when they are texting each other. There's green bubble and blue bubble issue. That means when people with Android phones and iPhones messaging each other, not everything works the way it should. That is because this conversation, this communication relied on SMS. It's an outdated messaging standard instead of RCS. RCS is a more modern, more secure industry standard that Android uses. So the mobile industry has long supported RCS as the way forward for texting, as RCS enables encryption, stronger protections against scam and fraud. So, and for Google, our goal is to provide the best possible messaging experience for our users, regardless who they are talking to. So that's why we have been raising the awareness of this interoperability issues in messaging between iOS and Android users, and how RCS would solve many of these issues. Good news is that in November last year, Apple also announced that it would adopt the RCS texting standard as part of its iOS 18 rollouts. This is a major milestone for Android and iPhone interoperability. And Google is looking to get as robust and seamless of RCS adoption as possible from Apple. But we also would like to want to make sure that Taiwanese users receive these protections and improvements as soon as possible. That is why Google recommend that governments around the globe or Taiwan to formally adopt RCS as its default texting standard and require adoption deadlines for all default messaging providers. For example, Google Message and iMessage. And that would have many benefits, including users got better protections from this fraud and scam issue, and their messages are encrypted, and business might have a safer way to communicate or engage with their consumers. So this would probably be a most recent messaging fragmentation example I can share with you all.
Thank you, Laura. Interesting. I'm just curious because in terms of RCS, is there like a global institution that decides like everyone should do this standard? I know that there is probably a global institution amongst the mobile industry that decided that this should be the standard. RCS should be the standard. But in terms of rollout, implementation, is there any body that mandates it for people to use?
Looks like not. I believe the mobile industry or the global institutions would encourage or advocate for a more modern and secure standards, but it still depends on each government to decide that if they want to roll out or mandate that this texting standards to be implemented in their own national level.
Thank you. This is helpful because why I ask this question is, sometimes some people see as the governments in wanting to protect their citizens, they ring fence, right? But on the flip side is also that governments have the power for their jurisdictions to all be more global as well. If we want to say, oh, now we have RCS, everyone should use RCS. Governments could also mandate for their jurisdiction to be coming on to using the same global standard. So they have the same power to fragment, but also the same power to push everyone to be global at the same time. So I think that is an interesting takeaway for me. Now let's move to maybe before I go to May and last, because I'm wondering, Bertrand, when I have this takeaway, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you think that what I said makes sense, or from your perspective, anything to add?
No, I find it fascinating, and as I was listening to what Laura was saying, I think we need, in many cases, to reframe a little bit the discussions that we have. And one thing important is that we need to understand or accept that we're all schizophrenic, because we want two things. The companies, for instance, on the one hand, they have a real incentive to want a global interoperable system because they can deploy their services very broadly. But there's something that we never mention, is that they contribute to fragmentation as well. Because the discussion that we just had regarding messaging systems doesn't address the question of the numerous messaging apps that are absolutely not compatible with one another. I have a very good friend who was working in Meta, who used to be in the police in the past, and she has been working extremely intensely for many years on the interoperability between the systems that Meta itself has. And we are all confronted with this challenge of being on one network, on one messaging app with some of the friends, and then on another one, we're on Signal, we're on Twitter. So this is another fragmentation. And it's the same for governments, because they're the schizophrenic as well. The good ones, let's say there are some, they both want to have their society participate in the global system and benefit from the exchanges and the interconnectivity and the expansion of their citizens. And at the same time, they have sometimes very legitimate concerns regarding, well, it can be disinformation or it can be other things, and the only tool is the national legislation. So I think the starting point is to recognize that fragmentation is a term that can be weaponized as well, and that we do have a very common problem, as I was saying in my keynote, which is where do we find the balance between those two tensions? And I repeatedly use the expression that I hate the notion of balance, actually. I always talk about reconciling objectives, because the common problem is to find this Goldilocks zone between, yes, we need restrictions, but not too much, and yes, we need openness, but not without any protection. Once we agree that we have this problem, we can get around the same table, which doesn't mean that we agree, but at least we're around the same table. And at the moment, we're not around the same table. And that's where the multi-stakeholder question comes into play, because if you look at, to finish, the whole question of disinformation, regulation of platforms, etc., which is another element of fragmentation, we do not have a single space where the governments, the companies, civil society actors, international organizations, at a high level, get together to say, we have a problem to fight abuses. How do we distribute the responsibilities? It is beginning to emerge with AI, but I'm not even sure that even on that massive question, people will do that. And that's a problem. Until we recognize that we are torn between competing interests, we cannot find the solutions.
Thank you, Bertrand. Very, very insightful. And let's come back to this point that you just made about how can we find common interests, which I think is important. Mayan, let's go to you first. Any other aspects when it comes to internet fragmentation, how people would see it from day to day, from your perspective, that we haven't covered?
I think a lot of the discussions that come out of it's very ICANN has
Sorry, Mayan, is it me? But your microphone's not working very well suddenly.
Me for the moment. I'll be back to you later.
Yeah, so I don't know whether, is your mic is too close to you, or I'm not sure. Can you try it again?
She says in the chat that there's somebody drilling upstairs.
Oh dear, I see. Okay, no problem. Okay, let's move on. Thanks. All right, so let's hold on to the point about common interests, but let's continue with the current discussion, which is, so we do feel there are certain stresses, for lack of a better word, which is pulling the internet in different directions. And I thought to just have our panelists share, what are the drivers they are seeing, and how it's pulling at them from different angles. So the main question really is, what are drivers for fragmentation in your space? So in the technical space, then as well as application space or the jurisdiction space, we touched upon it a little bit. Maybe let's expand on these points so that our audience, they can really have a sense and a feel for it. Can we go to Rolf first? What do you think are some drivers for fragmentation that you are seeing?
Thank you, Jia-Rong. I think if people want different things. So different stakeholders, they might have different expectation or imagination about what is the internet or how internet should respond to their desire or their needs. So I think it's how their expectation now is a frame. Just to push the internet into different directions. So just like what I said, mentioned, in Taiwan, I think it's also, what is everything is leads to more like fragmentation is mainly also, we have so many challenges, on the internet, or caused by the internet, but how we, the government or community see, how to solve these problems. So I think it is what I see, in Taiwan and also from our CCTLD, perspective. But I think it's mainly, behind, everything. Why, when we talk about, more like a logical level, fragmentation, why government or why other communities, they want to choose, to, use, these fragmentation to, to solve their problems or solve, the problem caused by the internet. I think mainly I see from here is that usually, first, is, of course, because of the technical, nature of the internet, because of the internet, give, these communities, maybe they don't think they have sufficient tools, to respond to the problems. So that's why they think it's easier and quickly for them, to use this kind of fragmentation, to respond to the problems. I think another, sometimes I think also because of legislations, because legislation maybe is not so, up to the date. So that's why when the society, need some quick solution, to some serious problems, they might also prefer, this kind of fragmentation approach. So, but I think the main issue, I think maybe is also, I think is the most important issue is that in the current society, I think it's not only, I think the people and also stakeholders or government, they are stuck in somewhere. So they don't have, workable, mechanism, to respond to the problems. So maybe they don't, for the multi-stakeholder approach, how they, have, the workable multi-stakeholder approach, to respond to the problems, I think is another issue. So that's why they also choose, to have these more like easier, quickly solutions. Yeah, I think it's mainly, I see from the CTOD perspective.
Thanks, Rofan. Can I just ask a follow-up question since, the two are related. So on the one hand, there's some drivers which are like you mentioned, governments, they feel they need to do something. Then there's the regulation piece, and then governments don't understand multi-stakeholder model. So from your perspective, how can we address some of these concerns? Because it's hard, like I used to be from government as well. It's hard for government to be in front. They tend to be more reactive. So how do we address some of these issues that you just raised?
I think first, maybe we need to recognize that there's no perfect solution, for the problems, caused by the internet or on the internet. So I think it's the reality we need to face. And based on that, how we, start to think about, how we all together, to work together, to address, the issues we face now. So I think at first, just back to my speech that I think it's still, the multi-stakeholder approach, how to make it workable. The core of, everything, still, is the trust. I think trust is really important. Trust will help, all the stakeholders, start to work together and to think about, how to, make it work. So among that, I think it is the communications and also the transparent discussion. I think it's all very important factors, to make, to build, the trust and make everything work. And on the other hand, I feel that sometimes I think why the government is so quickly want to, just to use a really easy solution, to fix the problems. Also because of, I think it's an insufficient level of digital literacy, in the society. So because of maybe community or society have a, not so realistic expectations about, how the problem should be solved, then it will also, make the government, maybe choose, to take a really extreme, action, to respond to the problems.
Thanks, Rofan. That's very helpful. This theme of trust, building understanding, these are very key points. Mayan, how is your drilling situation? Is it better? Can we go to you now? Cannot really hear you, sorry. Okay, sorry, Mayan, we can't really hear you. Let's try this again in a little bit. I'm not sure whether it's your microphone actually, rather than the drilling. let's see whether we can, the AV team, are you able to move May Ann into another room and test the sound again, then move her back in? I think that might be more productive. All right, let's try that first. Then, okay, in the meantime, so on the same question, drivers for fragmentation in your space. Karla, maybe you can share some from your perspective. You know, do you feel any stresses pulling at fragmentation in the numbering space?
Yes, absolutely. I think I really do share the sentiment that Joe Fan spoke about earlier, which is some of the challenges and some of the pulls on us. I do want to say, though, that the assumption that we started off with, that it's good, is not necessarily supported. I think that depends really on the motivation. And, you know, if it is, it's a matter of distinguishing whether that is for control or whether we are having these dialogues because we actually want to facilitate more collaboration. And I think that's really the goal that we should be considering, is because what I've found generally is that because of the increasing complexity of the environment that we all live and work in, a lot of that complexity has probably happened as a result of the internet. The speed at which things are developing, the ambiguity that surrounds a lot of things that we need to navigate on a daily basis has actually probably been complicated by the internet, broadly speaking. So what happens is that there is a lot of intervention, and let's talk about it at government level, where governments look at us as organizations that are trying to protect the bottom-up multi-stakeholder approach, and they go, well, you know, we need to get more control. And that's where we need to change the conversation through active and conciliatory dialogue to say this is not about control, it is about how do we facilitate collaboration to ensure that some of the really good work that the governments are trying to start implementing in various different regions or various different economies is actually supported. So it's not about locking things down, but it's about really, again, what Bertrand said is how do you keep it open, but still have a certain level of protection that that allows that openness to exist in a way that we at least understand who the players are, and this is something that we can all work towards. So there's interference at government level, there's interference constantly, and as governments change, there's a perpetual challenge of having those dialogues with various different players across the region. And at APNIC we serve 56 different economies, so it's an interesting rotation. But we don't tire, because this is fundamentally, again, what we're actually all about, is making sure that it does stay open. And so that's a continual dialogue. And then really we do have the commercial pressure. Again, that was alluded to when Laura spoke about our customers or our consumers, and talking about some of the developments that have happened in that space, which is absolutely admirable, and certainly broadly trying to be inclusive. But there is still this commercial driver that at the end of the day, there is an expectation that there is a return on investment. So there has to be a focus, and one would expect that commercial entities would be focused on how are we going to increase our bottom lines, but that's not what our motivation is. And again, that is something that we need to fiercely protect. Our motivation is not commercial. Our motivation is not for control for the sake of control, but our motivation is to increase opportunity for dialogue and collaboration.
Thank you, Karla. That's very, very insightful, because a lot of the general audience, especially Asians actually, because we are very, for lack of a better word, in Mandarin, we call it 向前看, which is actually a pun. 前 can mean to look forward. It can also mean money. So we look at money a lot. So that's the joke we tend to have for East Asians. Now but it's true, like, the perspective of we do something so that we have a return for investment seems to be a typical driver or motivation for doing anything. And it's actually a good segue because I wanted to go to Laura next about generative AI, incidentally. Because I remember Elon Musk, he helped found OpenAI, and he talked about OpenAI's mission when he first started it, which is to be open, everybody can use it to try it, make it better. It's supposed to be an open network. And then now he's suing OpenAI because it's become the exact opposite of what he had hoped. It's gone completely the other direction. It wants to be closed, keep the users in. It's very profit focused. That was the entire motivation. It's a segue to Laura in the sense that, because Google's talked about AI a lot. And Laura, can you share, whether the development of AI, which is now become the buzzword of the day, and everyone is very interested in it, could the development of AI result in internet fragmentation? For example, governments do not trust AI to the extent that they feel that a fragmented internet is the only solution.
Okay, thanks, Jia-Rong. Speaking of AI, Google has always been stressing that AI is too important not to regulate. So I also want to touch upon on the regulation and policy side of this, because whenever there's a new technology coming out, governments, around the world will want to put in their own, digital policies that is based on their own national context or their own national circumstances. But this has led to fragmentation due to a lack of international coordination and reliance on standards. And the lack of interoperability between iPhones and Androids that I just mentioned, as well as the fragmented privacy laws around the world, are examples of this kind of digital fragmentation. And we believe that fragmentation makes it difficult for business to operate. As for business, we'll have to comply with a variety set of different regulations, and that's all cost of law compliance. And this is especially burdensome for small and medium business because they might not have the resources to navigate this different sets of regulations. So when we talk about AI, instead of thinking it as a driver for internet fragmentation, we wanna flip the side and think that this might be the chance for us to do things right at the start. We have the opportunity here to do things differently with AI because it is still a relatively new field, and we can create coordinated and interoperable AI standards and regulations from the start around the globe. This is especially important for two reasons. First, AI is a powerful technology that can pose a serious risk if not being used responsibly. Second, AI works best when it is a cross-border technology, as this allows for more diverse data sets and helps to prevent bias. If there's an AI technology that only contains data points from Taiwan, then there's really no point of using that AI technology, right? So we have the opportunity here to prevent a fragmented AI policy landscape. And like Rofan just mentioned about the multi-stakeholder regime or a multi-stakeholder model, we believe that by working together, we can create a regulatory framework, and we can start there to make this technology both effective and fair.
Thank you, Laura. I think this might be a good, so actually one follow-up question first. Now, who do you think, because we talked about there's no global standard, at the same time AI works best cross-border. Who do you think can or would play a role to coordinate a global standard or regulation for AI? Would that be is there already such a body, or do you think there is enough motivation to have a kind of internet engineering task force kind of body for AI? Is there something like that that already exists?
Well, like Rofan said, there's no easy and quick solution to this, to this really tough questions. But we can start from gathering, all the wisdom and suggestions from multi-stakeholders, and start from there to see that if there's a institute or organization that can move this forward. That would be my first thinking. But welcome any other thoughts from other panelists.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this might be a good segue to Bertrand. What do you think?
Well, there are a lot of things that come to mind. I would like to come back to the question that you mentioned before, and that Karla actually used the word that I was about to put in. There's a key incentive here, which is control. It is a fundamental element, and it can be market control, society control. And it is not necessarily a negative thing. It's just an important driver, which is very different from the technical community, where the driver is to make things work. So these are completely different angles. And I want to share one thing that came to mind as I was listening. I think the notion that change is a positive value in itself is a very recent concept. We have a tendency to consider that anything that is new is better. The reality is that change is always unsettling because it changes the relationships of power between people. It reorganizes society, it rewires society. And so there are people who are going to win and people who are going to lose. This is what we have learned the hard way in a certain way regarding the globalization movement. And I think the current fragmentation discussion is also a spin-off or a sort of fallout of the whole deglobalization trend that or the disenchantment with some aspects of globalization. But it is a very important thing to have, once again, in this Goldilocks type of approach, the tension between the conservatives and the progressives. Restating this debate is a way to diminish the appetite for control and the misuse of control or the misuse of fragmentation for bad reasons. And here I want to make a comparison. In the work that we've been doing for Internet and Jurisdiction, we're now expanding the question of DNS abuse and looking at two completely different communities. One is the DNS operators, and the other one is the hosting providers. The DNS operators, they have one common interest. There's a root zone file. There is a common resource that they tap into, and it's the same for the distribution of IP addresses and so on. The hosting providers don't have this community among themselves. They just set up a server of various size. They don't have anything that they own or have to share. And this is the reason why there is no organization that brings together the hosting providers while there is an ICANN environment. And this is why today we have a problem addressing abuses online, when there is a need to cooperate between the DNS operators and the hosting providers, because there's no space. But that's one of the things we're trying to do at the moment. But to finish, this distinction between incentives and between objectives is also related to another word that Karla has used, which is complexity. And I think we completely appreciate how we have moved from things that were relatively linear and predictable to a massive evolution of society at the global level where this has become a complex adaptive system. It's much closer to a flock of birds or a school of fish than it is to the mechanical Newtonian type of linear effects. You can have one actor doing something very small that has a ripple effect virally that can transform elections or transform cybersecurity. And so the apparatus that we have for national legislations is very badly adapted to this sort of thing. Also because we all are arguing about how do we adopt legislation. But the key question is not how to adopt legislation only, it's how you implement legislation. And there is a flurry of legislations that are taking place now, and that's particularly the case in Europe, where the regulation looks very nice, but when you talk about the people who have to implement it, they have no idea how it is going to be implemented really. And this is where the multi-stakeholder approach has to be put in place, because regulation in a complex adaptive environment is an ongoing process. It's not a fire and forget. It's not something that you adopt and then the regulation is there for 20 years. And I think what we were discussing regarding AI, we need to get people around the table, and there are processes at the moment that are taking place. I mean, there will be a follow-up to the AI summit, the UK AI summit that will take place in France at the end of this year or beginning of next year. And we're beginning to talk about this because for once we're all considering that this is a common problem. And framing this common problem is absolutely essential with everybody around the table. But it's not an easy thing.
Thank you, Bertrand. So many wonderful insights there. Let's move back to Mayan. I hope that everything seems to be working now.
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Cool.
Sounds great. Okay, so we're still on the topic of drivers for fragmentation. Mm-hmm. You know, from your perspective, any other areas that we've not covered?
Well, I missed a couple of the interjections as I was moving locations now, but I did hear that we have covered quite a number of the main issues that do drive that fragmentation. And I think we do need to, I like what Bertrand mentioned about the complexity. We do need to understand that there are so many motivators for why people want to carve out certain sections. Again, could be child safety, could be for a particular use and experimentation of a new technology. It could be for various reasons, and honestly, it could be even for technical reasons. I really don't feel that we have come to the point where we realize that we can't have our cake and eat it too. If we want to have a central body that regulates everything, there will be a certain group of people in the multi-stakeholder community who will complain and say, "Oh, we should not have a one-stop shop for everything. It's not safe because it's a key man risk that you have there." And yet, at the same time, we do want efficiency. We understand that having standards and having everybody agreeing to standards does allow us that more efficient interoperability of systems. So we are constantly negotiating that space to make sure that interoperability, we don't forget it, while we are still having some sort of semblance of freedom to choose, right? Because we want to make sure that, well, we want to choose the operating system that we're on. That you can't just say, well, we're all going to be just choosing one operating system. We can't just choose one browser. We can't choose one device. We can't. But there are certain things which have been legislated, which have made life a little bit easier. I'll give one example. One of the examples is I think the EU came to an agreement and put in legislation that all chargers to prevent environmental, duplication of all of the charges. Everybody basically just use USB-C, please. I really like that because I think everybody really likes that regulation. Everybody thought we should stop that inefficiency. And I think that that's where a combination of market economics, sensibility, legislation, and that multi-stakeholder approach just need to come together and sort of collide and mash up and make a decision. But of course, there will be people who say, "Oh, why would you want to be legislating me? I want to be using my micro USB instead." We'll always have that, and it's always a negotiation. And I think that that's what makes, the internet quite fun for us, and it allows us to have that continued dialogue. I think that if everything was just about efficiency, I think it really takes out the humanness of being part of cyberspace. And for the new technologies, what Laura mentioned about, and the question that you had posed to Laura about, can there be one place where all of AI regulation can be decided? I feel AI, as well as a lot of other dual-use technologies, are multifaceted. They get applied to different areas: financial, healthcare, education. And if you want to have a one-size-fits-all organization to decide on all of that, I think we're asking for trouble. Jia-Rong, back to you.
Thank you. All right, so we have about 20 minutes left. And as usual, we don't want to just be having the panelists talking. Let's turn the floor over to the audience. Any questions or comments, questions for the panelists based on what they said, you agree, disagree, or you have any comments based on what we've discussed, open to the floor. So I can't see who's in the audience, but if there is one, I think the team on the ground can help me.
好，现场有没有与会的贵宾想要提问的 ？Any question from our participants? Feel free to stand in front of our microphone stand. 我们还有20分钟的时间。
Yeah, the broader theme is internet fragmentation. But if everyone agrees that what we're discussing is that fragmentation, end of the day, at the fundamental technical level is bad, but fragmentation perhaps at the application level or even regulatory level, it's a fact of life. It seems like that's the takeaway. But if there's anyone who disagrees, you can always share that. Or if you have any questions specific to about any new technologies that might be putting us apart, more to questions for Laura about AI.
Yes, we have one participant who have a question.
Please.
Hi. Hello. Am I audible? Okay. Hi, this is Edwin Chung. I guess it's a good question, and sometimes I think about it. There are two words. One word is fragmentation. The other is distributed nature. Maybe some of these things are purely a distributed nature of the internet, whereas some other issues that actually, when we talk about fragmentation, it is the fragmentation of part of the technical nature that makes it the open, interoperable, standards-based internet that we're talking about. So I think some of the things that, some of the confusion is that, you're saying that the network's always been quote unquote fragmented. Well, yeah, these jurisdictional, implementation, they're the distributed nature of the internet rather than the fragmentation, just like, policies in the GTLDs versus policies in the CCTLDs are different. I mean, they are a distributed nature. That doesn't necessarily fragment the internet. And I think, maybe that's something that needs to be clarified a bit more. So I wanted to perhaps hear from the panel what your thoughts are as well.
Thanks, Edmund. I think that's very insightful and makes perfect sense. Perhaps we have been, from this discussion, I feel perhaps in some discussions, people are overly worried about, the entire internet breaking apart at various levels. And from this discussion, I feel that actually it's brought more comfort for me that everyone largely agrees at the technical level we should use the same system. But then, there is a distributed nature more broadly in terms of how other things work on a day-to-day basis. Any thoughts from panelists responding to Edmund?
Yes, there are one more question. One more.
Okay, let's have Bertrand respond to Edmund first, then let's go to the other question, please.
Just a quick remark. Edmund is absolutely right to spot the fact that some of the terms we use have implicit meaning or things that they trigger in terms of reaction. The use of the term fragmentation has been precisely used to spread something that is an element of anxiety. That's true. I think the characteristic of the internet in its distributed nature is self-organization. It is self-determination. And what is really striking is that when you look at the Charter of the United Nations, it talks about the self-determination as the fundamental principle, but the self-determination of peoples, plural, which means populations. It's not the self-determination of individuals. And Switzerland has pushed the idea of digital self-determination as an organizing principle. And when you think about this, if we want to organize the governance of the digital society around this principle of self-organization, the way the internet is organized, it goes exactly in the direction that Edmund is talking. It is the flexibility that is what interoperability means, not the hierarchical nested system that is purely pyramidal, but something that is more mesh.
Thank you, Bertrand. Very helpful, very useful. Any other thoughts from the panelists? Otherwise, let's go to the next question from the floor.
Well, yes, Mr. Low, we have 2 participants waiting in line to have questions. So,
all right,
please.
Let's go to the audience, please.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Jia-Rong.
I can't see who's next.
Can you see me now, or can you hear me? All right, this is Ching. I'm here just to ask question because we have three people from Hong Kong asking questions. So I'm just making sure that we have somebody here, local, also asking a question. And no, I'm just, my question is about AI. I thought personally in recent couple months, I think seeing news on the AI regulations kind of worried me. So general question that I have is that are we overreacting on the AI regulation at this early stage? Couple thoughts, not necessarily a question to share. I think, for example, my college kids, they're at schools. They told me that every May and December, that's when AI actually becomes smarter because the students ask more questions at the term exams. That's one. So I think if you kind of regulating the AIs, I mean, the fun part or the educational benefits may kind of being impacted. And also, we're talking about, for example, AI kind of, for example, in the past few months, I'm trying to prove myself kind of existence because I'm asking AI, and I know that AI, answers through machines. So I feel like that I'm a person that I'm helping, training, for example, the LLMs and other. So it kind of at this stage, I'm feeling like by interacting with AI or machine, we're trying to prove like human beings, we still have values, at least to myself. So I think for that particular point, are we overreacting here? Are we over-regulating at this stage? That's a general question. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiaojing. Okay, I think this question might be more suitable for Laura. Like, what are you seeing from your perspective when interacting with governments about AI?
Yeah, like I say at the beginning, for Google, we think that AI is too important not to regulate well. Like I mentioned, we feel like AI is a really relatively new field. So if the governments around the world want to regulate this, instead of people are doing their own things based on their own needs, it would be more useful and more make the technology more effective and fair if we can coordinate this and come up with a more consistent and interoperable standard. For Google, we have been stressing the importance of responsible AI. That means that we have our own guidelines of how to develop this technology and especially apply that, because there are many layers of the application on AI technology. So I can only speak for like how Google would responsibly use this technology, develop this technology, and we would want to cooperate with, countries, governments around the globe to make sure that the regulations they want to roll out is feasible, and at the same time that can be applied to different layers of applications. I guess this is my initial response.
Thank you. Maybe we can turn to Mayan as well. Mayan, in the various conversations you've been part of, any observations regarding AI?
Well, I think that the AI field definitely is still emerging. I do also feel sometimes when I'm talking to people that I'm trying to justify my existence as a human being and my value as a human being. I just saw this meme the other day that said that I wish that AI wasn't doing the fun things. It wasn't doing the photography and the art for me. I want to do the art and the photography. I want AI to do the stuff that I don't want to do. So I do think that we have a ways to go. I think I want to come back to the idea of how we can continue to make the internet interoperable, even with AI and other work. So one of the things which I know some of the governments and research institutes are doing are looking at multilingual AI. How do you do the LLMs? How do you build these machines to make sure that they are able to take in, contextualize, and read multilingual input and provide sensible output as well within the context of that community, etc. So I think that we do have a thriving group of researchers. They're probably the new technical community that you would have to work with. So we can absolutely be including them in this new technical community. What I find reassuring is that we have a term, technical community, to refer to this group of people who have to be engaged in the multi-stakeholder process. So it is a continued dynamic that we have to continue to engage with. And I feel AI as a technology is exciting, but from a modality perspective, I don't feel that we absolutely need to change the way that we're engaging each other and dialogue and discussion.
Thanks, Mian. Maybe I can add one quick point on regulation. So finally, because Kenny, in his opening, he said in this forum, maybe we can talk about how to make money with crypto. Then, of course, it's a joke. But the interesting part about it is I'm part of the blockchain community on a personal basis. And earlier, when there was a cryptocurrency boom, not the current one, but in the earlier stages, within the blockchain community, actually, there's a lot of community members and small companies that were setting up blockchain projects that actually indicated that we like to be regulated. Because if you regulate, you can tell me what I should do, rather than being completely greenfield. And if I were to invest and venture into that other space, then shut me down completely. So there's an interesting view on this term regulation as well, because on the one hand, it says it amounts to control, but on the other hand, also on the flip side, it provides a certain level of predictability, which is interesting when you think about whether, when we tend to think about regulation as being a negative word. So I thought to just share that perspective from my side. Now, in the interest of time, let's move to the next audience. You have a question as well?
Yep, Alban Kwan from CSC. From Australia, not Hong Kong, by the way. So my question is this. When I listen to the session, I think that there are essentially two types of fragmentation possible. One is more like a top-down kind of government-driven fragmentation, which I think I actually agree with Jia-Rong that government are normally reactive, so we can actually prevent that from creating a robust bottom-down kind of bottom-up kind of policy. But the other kind of fragmentation that I can think of is actually more of a bottom-up kind of fragmentation, which is essentially driven from concentration. So if you have a couple of really strong players in the internet in different areas that dominate the whole market, then that concentration create the fragmentation itself, because it's kind of go against the nature of the internet. So my question to the panel is that, do you think this kind of bottom-up kind of fragmentation is preventable, or whether it is actually bad at all? Thanks.
Thanks, Alvin. Any thoughts from the panelists who would like to try with a response?
Happy to.
Yeah, Bertrand, please.
Yeah, very quickly. That's a good question, and it's actually something that I was alluding to in terms of the role of the private sector in terms of structuring the market or organizing the markets with objectives of control as well, because that's the orientation. I think we have a use case to make a connection with the previous question regarding AI. We will be confronted with, I think, one of the biggest questions that we have really right now to address regarding AI is the question of open source or not open source. This is a very fundamental question because it doesn't touch upon whether it is going to be used for killing jobs or things like that. It is typically a question of what are the structural dynamics that will come out of a choice of A or B. Is it closed models that are regulated very strongly, or do we open it up and encourage open source for all the reasons that we've encouraged open source in other spaces? And honestly, it is very difficult to choose here. This is why we need a real debate, because there are really pros and cons for both sides. And I think the question that was just asked is something that we will be confronted with in the case of AI, even before we address the question of what it is going to be used for, etc. This is a very, very important policy question, and it is a global one, because if one country decides to encourage the open source dimension, it will spread. If it is, on the other hand, controlled everywhere, it has consequences on the market. So there is a question, and we don't have the space to do this. So this question of how markets and societies structure themselves is actually the core of the debate. What are the institutions? And at the moment, what is the space that we will use to discuss this?
Thank you, Bertrand. Okay, we have 3 minutes, so we have to close. Can I look to the panelists, and if you have one thing you want the audience to take away with, what would it be? Just share one thing, all right? We just go around the panel. Can we go with Karla first?
I had a feeling you were going to pick on me. Thank you. Yes, I think the one thing is really what I alluded to earlier. Let's keep the dialogue open. Even in what we were just speaking about now, it's not about controlling the evolution, it's about directing the evolution of the new technologies that are emerging, and seeing how we can support it in a way that is going to not or allow it to evolve, but not shut down that evolution, but really direct it so that we do make sure that we maintain the opportunity for having it broadly adopted and distributed in a safe kind of environment. So the one thing I'd like to leave you with is, let's keep the dialogue open. Let's include as many stakeholders as we possibly can from the various different sectors in the discussions that we're having about how we can support the evolution of the internet, and let's see what we can, how we can aid it as opposed to shutting it down. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's go to Rofan. One thing for the audience to take home with.
I think for me, I think it's, internet, I think it's become too complicated now. But I think it's a trust. Just like I agree with Karla that, more and more dialogue and communication. How to build, the trust so that we can work together. To find that. Find a solution. not perfect solution, but it's a workable solution, I mean, for society. I think it's important. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Laura. Make sure we all use Google AI.
Definitely. Yes. So no matter how technology evolve or how the internet evolve, I think for Google, there's one important belief and promise that we want to keep. It's that internet is a shared resources that everyone could access wherever they lived. So like Rolf and Karla says, we also believe in keeping the dialogue going and having everyone have the chance to share their perspective, that we could altogether we could form a better internet space and make it safe and useful for everyone.
Thank you. Let's go to Mayan.
I think I'd like to say, be patient with each other and make space for new people. Yep.
Thank you. And let's have Bertrand.
I think in complex environments, we need mechanisms that allow for experimentation, such as sandboxes, and that the ultimate goal of this dialogue is to achieve legal interoperability and not only technical interoperability.
Thank you. Now with that, we're exactly on the dot. I think I will just close with a couple of my own takeaways. The first is, perhaps we don't have to use fragmentation that much. One of the takeaways, like Edmund was mentioning, in how I'm looking at it actually is how Bertrand mentioned. The architecture, the internet architecture is fundamentally global. This has become a fact of life as much as fundamentally we all live on Earth. We can't live on Mars yet, so we have to live on this Earth. We can't break the Earth apart in a fundamental technical sense. So in some ways, the internet for us is also quite similar. But what's happening around the world has its distributed effect and distributed nature. And we need to have the various dialogues to help us work with one another. But in this day and age where we are moving away from globalization, it's comforting to know that we have this internet that can continue to keep us connected and continue for us to share the objective of collaboration and being able to work with one another. And we can continue to develop new technologies that can benefit mankind out of it. And it's important that we share this common objective. And perhaps all of us can take away that we can, in our own spaces, contribute to the dialogue to find a Goldilocks zone that Bertrand talked about, to balance between different interests and objectives at the same time. So that would be my closing for today, and hope everyone enjoyed this session. I personally learned a lot from this. So thank you very much. Wish I could join everybody for lunch, but sorry if I couldn't be there in person. So I wish everybody have a great lunch and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Law, and all the speakers. But one last thing. Can I invite our moderator and all of our speakers to have one more group photo before we leave the screen? Are they still online? If it's possible, yes. All right, perfect. So can we look at your camera in the front for the online participants? Can you look at the camera online? And for on-site speakers, can you look at the photographer in the front? Okay, quickly. On the countdown, 1, 2, 3, smile. All right, everyone, let's give them a big round of applause again. Thank you all for participating and giving us such a wonderful panel discussions.